안녕하세요.
The tension had reached its peak. Tae-woo and Ha-ri were one step away from uncovering the truth behind the threats and the attempts to bring down Jung Corporation. However, they both knew that their next move could change everything forever. That night, Ha-ri received an anonymous message with an address and a single sentence, "Come alone if you want answers." Tae-woo insisted that she shouldn't go, but Ha-ri knew this was her last chance to uncover the whole truth. Dressed in a long coat, she arrived at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Seoul. The place was shrouded in darkness, with only a few flickering lights overhead. As soon as she stepped inside, a voice echoed through the space. "Do you really want to know the truth, Yoon Ha-ri?" She turned quickly and saw Park Ji-hoon emerging from the shadows, a cold smile on his lips. "What do you want with all of this?" Ha-ri asked, keeping her stance firm. Ji-hoon chuckled. "I don't want Jung Corporation. I want revenge. Tae-woo ruined my life, and now it's time for him to pay for what he did." Before Ha-ri could respond, the warehouse doors burst open. Tae-woo entered, flanked by his security team. "It's over, Ji-hoon," he said, his gaze hard and unyielding. Ji-hoon smirked, but there was defeat in his eyes. "You may have won this time, Tae-woo, but don't think this is over." Moments later, the police arrived, taking Ji-hoon into custody. When everything was finally over, Ha-ri turned to Tae-woo, feeling the weight of everything they had been through. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly. He sighed and nodded. "Yes, thanks to you." A silence filled with meaning settled between them. Tae-woo took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "Ha-ri, after everything, do you still want to stay by my side?" She hesitated for a moment, then smiled softly. "I think we've proven we make a good team." For the first time in a long while, Tae-woo smiled, and in that moment, they both knew a new chapter was just beginning. In the days that followed, Jung Corporation worked to recover from the fallout of the conspiracy. Tae-woo called an emergency meeting with the shareholders to disclose everything that had happened. For the first time, he did not hide the mistakes of the past, but assured them that the company would move in a new direction. Ha-ri, on the other hand, realized she was no longer just an employee. Her influence within the company was growing, and her relationship with Tae-woo was becoming more complex. One quiet evening, as they stood on the rooftop of the company headquarters, overlooking the Seoul skyline, Tae-woo gently took her hand. "I am not the same man you first met, Ha-ri, and you have changed too. What happens next is up to both of us." She looked at him, feeling her heartbeat quicken. For the first time, their future was truly in their hands. The cold night of Seoul poured over the streets, illuminated by neon signs and scattered headlights. The air was heavy with humidity, and the hurried footsteps of passers-by contrasted with the calm that reigned inside the luxurious restaurant. The glass walls reflected the vibrant city outside, creating an atmosphere that was both intimate and distant. Du-hwan, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, stared at his reflection in the whiskey glass. For years, he had shielded himself against any trace of emotion, his serious and impenetrable expression serving as a barrier against everything and everyone. But that night, something was about to change. He tapped his fingers on the table, as if trying to dispel a silent restlessness. That was when the glass door opened, and Ji-min stepped inside. The sharp click of her heels echoed against the polished floor, and Du-hwan felt time slow down. Her silhouette was the same as it had been years ago, but there was something different in her eyes. A hidden weariness, perhaps, or just the inevitable change that time brings. It couldn't be. Not here, not now. The heart he believed to be made of ice gave an unexpected jolt in his chest. Ji-min, for her part, froze when she saw him. Her face remained expressionless, but her eyes betrayed the impact of that moment. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and walked toward him, each step carefully measured, as if she were treading on a minefield. "Seems like Seoul has become too small for the both of us," Ji-min said, a touch of irony lacing her voice as she approached. Her eyes met his, and for an instant, something almost imperceptible flickered there. Longing? Resentment? It was hard to tell. Du Huan allowed himself a brief smile, though his eyes told a different story, a mixture of surprise and something else, something even he didn't want to admit. Small enough for fate to bring us face to face, don't you think? His voice was low, but heavy with meaning. Silence hung between them like an abyss. Neither dared to break it completely, yet Ji-min's gaze revealed a subtle tremor, a trace of something both were trying to bury. Old memories began to dance in their minds, memories that should have been left in the past but now felt as vivid as ever. Du Huan leaned back in his chair, studying her for a few seconds more. He noticed the way she clutched her purse too tightly, as if holding onto something tangible. It unsettled him. It made him want to understand why, after all this time, her presence still had the power to unnerve him. "Tell me, Ji-min, how long have you known you'd end up finding me here?" He leaned slightly forward, scrutinizing her reaction. She blinked slowly, as if digesting the question. Then, she tilted her head slightly and gave a small, lopsided smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Perhaps since the moment I decided to return to Seoul, or perhaps fate decided for me." The rain drummed softly against the windows of the sophisticated space where Ji-min and Du Huan sat. The unexpected encounter from the previous night still echoed in their minds, like a persistent background melody refusing to fade away. Despite the apparent calm, the atmosphere between them was charged with unspoken tension, with words that had never been fully said and silences that concealed painful truths. Ji-min shifted uneasily in her chair, her fingers lightly tapping against the side of her teacup. The dark liquid reflected the cafe's soft lights, but her mind was far from there. She avoided looking directly at Du Huan, who maintained the same cold and impenetrable demeanor as always. But something in the way he lightly gripped his coffee cup hinted that he was not entirely indifferent either. "You still take your coffee without sugar?" Ji-min's voice sounded more like a statement than a question. Du Huan lifted his gaze to her, his intense eyes meeting hers for a brief moment before shifting to the window. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he brought the cup to his lips and took a sip, as if carefully weighing every word before speaking. "Some things never change," he finally said, his voice low but laden with meaning. Ji-min felt a tightness in her chest. What did he mean by that? Was it just about the coffee, or about them? The past came rushing back with force, like a wave reaching the shore and destroying everything in its path. She couldn't stop it. "Some things do change," she countered, a bitter smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Some things are forced to change." Du Huan placed his cup on the table with a small, dry sound. He looked at her, and for the first time that night, something in his gaze wavered, a glimpse of something he didn't want to reveal. "I never wanted it to end that way," he said, his voice a bit softer now, almost a confession. Ji-min felt a shiver run down her spine. The words she had waited so long to hear were finally being spoken, yet instead of relief, all she felt was pain and anger, because now it didn't matter anymore. "But it did," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her fingers, "and you never wanted to know why." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Ji-min looked away, staring at the rain falling outside. She knew that, at that moment, she had opened a door that might never close again. Du Huan pressed his lips together, his jaw tightening as if holding back a response that would never come. "I was afraid," he finally admitted, exhaling a heavy sigh. "Afraid to hear a truth I couldn't bear." Ji-min let out a humorless laugh, leaning slightly forward. "The truth always finds a way to reach us, Du Huan, whether through words or silence. And now, years later, we're still here, pretending nothing happened." He turned his gaze to the wet streets outside. The neon reflections danced in the puddles formed by the rain, and he wondered how many times he had walked those very streets trying to forget Ji-min. Yet here she was, so close and so distant at the same time. "Do you think we can go back?" His voice was low, almost hesitant, as if the very question caused him pain. Ji-min pressed her lips together. A response was on the tip of her tongue, but before she could say it, her phone vibrated on the table. She picked it up and glanced at the message. Her eyes narrowed, her expression suddenly closing off. Du Huan noticed the shift and felt an unsettling pang in his chest. Something wasn't right, and he knew that whatever it was, It would change everything. The autumn sun filtered through the wide office windows, casting golden shadows over Du Juan's impeccably organized desk. He was reviewing contracts with his usual calculated coldness when a subtle murmur in the hallway caught his attention. The door opened, and there stood Jimin, wearing her usual professional expression, though her eyes betrayed a hint of discomfort. "Good afternoon, Mr. Du Juan." The formality in her voice made a faintly sarcastic smile dance on his lips. "Good afternoon, Jimin." He made sure to emphasize her name, feeling a flicker of satisfaction when he noticed the subtle tightening of her expression. "What brings you here?" She placed a dossier on the desk, keeping her gaze steady on him. "We need to review the merger contracts with H&K Enterprises. There are some clauses that require your attention before tomorrow's meeting." Du Juan picked up the documents and flipped through a few pages, taking his time. He could hear the slight tremor in her breath, even though Jimin was doing her best to maintain her flawless composure. The office, despite its spaciousness, suddenly felt too small for the two of them. "I imagine that's the main reason for your visit," he said without looking up from the papers. Jimin crossed her arms, as if creating an invisible barrier between them. "If you're referring to our conversation at the cafe, don't worry. I'm professional enough to separate personal matters from work." He finally lifted his eyes, narrowing them slightly. There was a challenge there, mixed with something he had yet to decipher. "Good to hear that," he said, his voice carrying a faint trace of irony. "After all, I am also an impeccable professional." Jimin took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. The game of appearances between them was only beginning, and both knew that no matter how much they tried to ignore it, the feelings were still there, pulsing beneath the surface. Du Juan turned another page of the dossier, but before continuing, he lifted his gaze and let out a remark that made Jimin's heart falter for an instant. "But how long can you keep up this facade, Jimin?" She opened her mouth to respond, but the words got caught in her throat. There was something in the way he was looking at her that made her confidence waver. The silence between them stretched, thick with tension. Jimin straightened her posture and forced a smile, masking the storm within her. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice came out lower than she had intended. Du Juan interlaced his fingers over the desk and leaned slightly forward. "Of course you do," he murmured, his dark eyes studying her every reaction. "After all, you were the one who chose to walk away back then, weren't you?" Jimin felt a tightness in her chest. She averted her gaze, focusing on the office bookshelves, as if searching for an escape. The past was returning with a force she hadn't anticipated. "What happened doesn't matter anymore," she said, keeping her tone under control. Du Juan let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Then why are you still here?" he asked, his words piercing through her carefully maintained composure. She met his gaze again, and this time, there was fire in her eyes. "Because I am a professional, as you said." Her voice was firm now. "And because I won't allow the past to interfere with my present." He held her gaze for a moment, but then he looked away, letting out a silent sigh. Something was about to shift between them, and they both knew it. The question was, who would break first? Night fell over Seoul like a mantle of black silk, adorned by the vibrant lights of the city that never slept. Du Juan stood on the terrace of his building, an untouched glass of whiskey between his fingers, staring at the horizon, lost in thought. He knew that tonight would change everything. Jimin arrived a few minutes later. Her silhouette appeared under the dim light of the balcony, her eyes filled with determination, but also with a restrained apprehension. She stopped a few steps away from him, hesitating before speaking. "We need to talk, Du Juan." Her voice was controlled, but the slight tremor betrayed the storm inside her. He twirled the glass between his fingers, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "Finally, I thought you'd never say that." Jimin clenched her fists. The pain of the past was still present, but there was no more room for postponements. "I couldn't tell you before. There were reasons." She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "What happened between us, the reason I left. You need to know the truth." Du Juan finally turned to face her. His dark eyes were intense, analyzing every detail of her expression. "The truth?" He took a step toward her. "Then tell me, Jimin, what have you been hiding from me all this time?" She felt her heart pound. This was the moment she had avoided for years. But now, there was no turning back. Jimin inhaled deeply before whispering the words, that would change the course of their lives forever. I left you because I knew you would never be able to forgive me for what I did, and I couldn't forgive myself either. Duhuan's face closed into an unreadable expression. The silence between them became deafening. What did you do, Jimin? His voice came out low, a tone that barely concealed the mix of pain and anger. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the crushing weight of the confession. I was the reason you lost that business opportunity years ago. I stopped you from closing that deal, and I never had the courage to tell you. Duhuan's eyes widened slightly before hardening once again. Are you saying that? You betrayed me? Jimin swallowed hard. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I see that all I did was destroy what we had. The wind blew between them, as if the night itself felt the weight of those words. Duhuan took a step back, processing the revelation. His gaze flickered between pain and anger, as if he didn't know which emotion consumed him more. You had a choice, Jimin. You always did, but you chose to deceive me. His voice was hoarse, filled with suppressed emotion. I spent years wondering what I did wrong, and now I find out that it was you who stabbed me in the back. Jimin took a step toward him, her breath uneven. I regretted it every single day since then, but I couldn't go back. I was afraid you'd never listen to me. She swallowed hard. And you never tried to find out what really happened. Duhuan let out a bitter laugh, looking away. Maybe because I believed you would never be capable of something like this. The tension between them grew. Jimin saw his eyes glaze over for a moment before he shifted his gaze to the city below. And now? What do you expect me to do with this information? He asked, his voice laden with pain. Jimin hesitated. She knew that no answer would be enough. But still, she took another step forward, her pleading eyes meeting his. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, Duhuan. I just want you to know the truth. And maybe, one day, we can find a way to start over. The wind blew again, carrying with it the uncertainty of the night. Duhuan's gaze softened for a brief instant, but soon his expression closed off once more. We'll see if that day ever comes, Jimin, he replied before turning and disappearing through the door, leaving her alone beneath the vastness of the city. A light rain fell over Seoul, turning the streets into a blurred mirror of lights and reflections. Jimin walked briskly, unfazed by the cold wind lashing against her face. Her thoughts had been in turmoil since that night on the terrace. Duhuan had learned the truth, and the pain in his eyes still haunted her. She hesitated before entering the building, her cold fingers hovering over the glass door. She took a deep breath, as if trying to gather the courage for what was to come. When she finally pushed the door open and stepped into the spacious hall, her eyes met a familiar face. Duhuan was there, standing beside the reception desk, his gaze fixed on her. He showed no surprise, only kept a controlled expression, as if he had been expecting this moment. Jimin felt a tightness in her chest. There was so much to say, yet the barrier between them seemed greater than ever. You came. Duhuan's voice broke the silence, deep and restrained. Jimin lowered her head for a moment before looking at him again. I needed to come. His gaze narrowed. Needed to? Or just felt guilty? She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath. I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't keep running. Duhuan let out a low, humorless laugh. Running has always been your specialty, hasn't it? But now it's too late for regrets. Jimin took a step forward, her eyes shining with a mix of sorrow and determination. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here because I want to understand what's still left between us. Duhuan remained silent for a few seconds, analyzing her. The tension between them was palpable. Finally, he let out a sigh and looked away toward the large window, where the city lights flickered like distant stars. I don't know if there's anything left, but maybe that's what we need to find out. His voice was low, but heavy with meaning. Jimin felt a small spark of hope, fragile but real. Fate had brought them face to face again, but it was up to them to decide the next step. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of raindrops tapping against the glass. Jimin clenched her fists, searching for the right words. I spent years trying to convince myself that I did the right thing, but every time I think of you, I realize something was left unfinished. She swallowed hard, her gaze locked onto his. And I need to know if you feel the same. Duhuan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly to a nearby armchair, sitting down as if he needed stability. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture betraying his emotional exhaustion. I tried to move on too, Jimin, he finally admitted. But I could never erase you from my life. Everything kept leading me back to this moment. Jimin's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked quickly to hold them back. She took a deep breath and walked toward him, stopping just a few steps away. And what do we do now? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Duhwan lifted his gaze to her, his eyes reflecting a storm of emotions. There was pain there, but also a trace of hope. That depends on you, Jimin, he said, his voice deep and sincere. Are you ready to face everything that tore us apart? Because I don't want to live with more regrets. Jimin inhaled deeply, her heart hammering against her chest. She knew this decision would define everything. The rain kept falling outside, as if the universe itself was waiting for the choice they would make. But this time, it was Jimin who had the power to decide their future.